This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. They include Chris Fitzsimon from NC Policy Watch, former Representative Gene Arnold from Nash County, one of our favorite journalists, Cash Michaels, and John Hood from the John Locke Foundation. We begin by thanking Henry Hinton for subbing for us for the last 2 weeks. In less than 4 weeks, the new state budget year begins, and there's much work to be done to have a new revenue and spending plan in place before then, especially since lawmakers have promised to adjourn before July 1. This week's show is going to talk about the new proposed budget, House and Senate tax reform proposals, and if we have time, we'll get talking about bills caught up in the crossover deadline. Let's get started. This has been a most unusual legislative session, so it wasn't a surprise that the Senate presented their budget proposals on Sunday night. The $20.6 billion budget is slightly less than what Governor McCrory proposed, but still a 2% increase over current year's spending. Senators proclaimed this budget would streamline state government and anticipates a $200 million tax cut. However, they didn't tell us how because no revenue figures were released with the plan. Their budget does not cut the university system as much as McCrory proposed, gives state employees no pay increases, and continues to reduce funding for the pre-K program while giving hefty increases to Medicaid spending, even as it calls for Medicaid reform by 2014. I want to go around the table and talk to all of you and ask you to give your evaluation of the Senate budget plan. John, we'll start with you.
Well, I think I gave Governor McCrory's plan a B back when it came out, which is high praise. I don't give any plan an A unless I write it.
Yes.
You know? So since the Senate plan is not radically different from McCrory's plan, at least in the general parameters of it, I'd also give it about a B.
Okay. Cash, what do you say?
Well, the Senate plan zeroes out a number of nonprofit economic development interests, the minority development thing, the community initiative.
We're going to talk about that in a second.
Yeah, and so here we are. We have a General Assembly that talks about wanting to spur jobs, and yet they cut from the budget the very groups that are working hard to make that happen, particularly in communities of color.
Gene, your assessment.
Yeah, I'm disappointed in what they did with some of the education issues, such as increasing the classroom size and cutting some of the funding for the teachers who were getting certification. But it seems to me that the Senate took a shotgun approach and had no real theme or no real motive as to what they were trying to accomplish except to cut. I think that we will see some improvement come out of the House, but the end product is yet to be determined.
Chris?
Well, I agree with a good bit of what Gene and Cash have said. I probably would give it a D. A couple points that haven't been made yet. First of all, there were really no budget subcommittee hearings to speak of where there was testimony about things like moving the SBI from the Attorney General's office to the Department of Public Safety. They put in a lot of things. The bill, I think, is almost 450 pages long, not the money report. So it's completely filled with special provisions, which is a bad idea. So the process stunk. It was terrible. And I think they made some bad decisions. Gene mentioned some in education. They actually cut more pre-K positions than are actually in the budget because they didn't renew some that were put in by Governor Perdue. I think it's a little ironic to say we want kids to read by the end of the third grade and then cut teacher assistants in the second and third grade and cut pre-K that helps kids read. So there was a lot of cuts in education. And the last point I'll make is there was a lot of partisan decisions made, like moving the SBI. They cut out the Rural Economic Development Center, which is run by Billy All, who's a Democrat. They set up a very similar organization in the Department of Commerce under their own deputy secretary. And there were a lot of places in the budget where it felt like it was a lot of revenge and partisan sniping.
Well, let me ask you this. John said that this budget and the governor's budget were not too far apart, but Governor McCrory earlier this week was not very favorably inclined toward this budget, was he, Cash?
No, he was not at all. Indeed, he for whatever reason, it seems that the Senate and the governor are not on the same page. He seemed to favor more what the House was doing. The House, even though it's not a favorite budget of mine, seemed more humane, if I could use that term, than the Senate budget.
Now, so far as it goes, I heard rumors this week that they may not be able to put a tax package and a budget together by June 30th. in time for the new fiscal year, and that we may have a continuing resolution. Anybody else hear that?
I suppose that's possible, but I still don't think that's the most likely outcome. The governor's budget and the Senate budget differ on a number of specifics. I was saying that the total amount of spending is roughly the same, and in most cases, the two amounts are very similar. The differences are primarily, as you mentioned, university, and the biggest difference, of course, is Medicaid. Governor McCrory's budget, while an interesting idea at this point, is sort of a historical artifact, because since his budget came out, we discovered that the Medicaid hole that he had capped is actually much bigger than that. So the Senate had to come in and cap a much bigger hole.
Lanier Chancellor has got to feel like the most vindicated man in the state of North Carolina.
Why is that?
Because he told the legislature 2 years ago that they couldn't make the cuts that they were proposing to make.
We're talking about the proposal for the next 2 years.
But the reason why they've been having the continued budget deficits that they've had is because they tried to make these cuts, which were not approved.
That's not it. What happened is, first of all, they didn't fully anticipate the money they had to pay back the feds. The Medicaid under the previous administration made serious errors that cost hundreds of millions of dollars. In addition to that, we're talking about more rapid rate of growth in the next 2 years than was projected, which has nothing to do with what happened 2 years. It's still one of the smallest growths in the nation, but that's not the point. It's not one of the smallest.
I don't want to dwell on that. I want to get back to the problem one of the problems I saw with this budget, and that is Republicans for years railed against Democrats who slipped special provisions into budgets, mandating rules, laws, policies, and so forth like that. This budget is full of them. Chris, you mentioned one of the biggest ones, which is the North Carolina Rural Economic Development Center. Right. It cut $16.7 million out of the Rural Economic Development Center. The total
wipes it out. Right.
Well, not only did it do that, but it prohibited any state agency or any nonprofit that has any state money from doing any business with the Rural Economic Development Center. This sounds pretty vindictive to me, does it you?
Well, it is. I think it's one of the examples. I mean, I think that you'll see these kind of things throughout the budget, which really, I think, caught a lot of people, including me, off guard. I thought they would do some of these things I disagreed with, but it really looks like they went after people and were trying to settle scores. And they did this at the same time they were putting this very similar function in the Department of Commerce. They targeted specific people in filled positions to be fired. This was a budget that was settling political, I think, partisanship, political scores, and that has no place in the budget. And again, and you mentioned the special provisions. I was shocked during the Senate debate. Senator Apodaca opposed an amendment by Senator Bryant, who wanted to toughen economic interest statements by saying this is a policy decision. We don't want to make these in the budget. We haven't had any hearings about it. Well, Governor McCrory himself told David Crabtree, WRAL, he was surprised there were no hearings at all about moving the SBI. This just pops out of nowhere on the Sunday night. Nobody's even thought about it.
It was my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm sure you will, that there were about 50 people on the Rural Economic Board of Directors, plus they had several people who were making very large salaries, and they justified some of these cuts while taking it away because of that reason alone. But I think...
But there hadn't been any complaints about the Rural Center that I know of, have there?
Tom, this
well, I'm not sure they've done a whole lot.
This dispute has been going on for 2 decades. The Rural Economic Development Center was created for partisan reasons. Okay. They had an outgoing Democratic administration and incoming Republican administration. Well, we better take some of our employees who used to work in our Democratic administration, put them into a separate nonprofit so we can keep funding them from the legislature. That was the original idea.
Oh, come on, John. That's not why they formed it. They formed it to help community economic development. You're saying there was no community economic development
Chris,
needs.
If you can spend that money through the state agency or you can spend it through a nonprofit, either way, you're going to spend the money. We're talking about how to spend the money.
We're talking about economic development, though.
Does the state have a real great record of helping rural economic development in counties?
Apparently not, because we've been doing this for 25 years.
All right, we're going to talk some more about this budget that the Senate has passed after these messages.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Our farmers are among the most productive in the world, even while lacking a stable and reliable agricultural workforce. But the workforce problems in agriculture have reached a breaking point, and food demand continues to rise. Reforms to the immigration system can ensure that farmers have access to the workers they need. The good news is that we still have time to fix this corrosive problem. Tell your congressional representatives that we need comprehensive immigration reform in 2013.
The North Carolina Medical Society is committed to a healthier North Carolina. We feel as an organization representing over 14,000 physicians that we have a responsibility and an obligation to help our citizens become more healthy. And by doing this, we want to help educate them about ways in which they need to keep themselves healthy through good nutrition, exercise, and maintaining a healthy lifestyle. These ingredients will help not only individual citizens become and maintain a healthier outlook on their lives, but also help contribute to having a healthier state.
Resident lenders of North Carolina are licensed providers of safe and responsible financial services. Existing regulations limit consumer choice. It's time to modernize consumer finance laws. Learn more at responsibleloansnc.com.
As homeowners, we count on the mortgage interest and property tax deductions.
I bought a home knowing that I was safe on my state taxes.
My home is not an ATM for politicians in Raleigh.
I already pay my fair share.
It's wrong for politicians in Raleigh to take more of my money for their so-called tax reform.
It will hurt our fragile economy.
It will decrease home values and cost us money.
Help save the mortgage interest and property tax deductions. Visit taxreformfacts.org.
We now return to NC Spin.
We want to wrap up our discussion about the state budget that the Senate passed. Okay, the Senate has passed the budget. Now it goes over to the House. Any prospect at all that the House is going to concur with this?
No.
Oh, no. All right. So then the House has to pass their own version of a budget, correct?
But they will, and they'll have. We already know some of the things the House budget will have, the Senate budget doesn't, like the eugenics compensation.
Right.
And they're going to have somewhat different approaches to a number of the issues we just talked about. It's not even clear they'll have that SBI move.
Well, I'm sorry, reportedly Speaker Tillis is not happy that it's 450 pages long and filled with provisions, so I think you'll see a much slimmer budget, and so there'll be a lot of policy debates hanging out there, and it'll be interesting to see if the Senate insists on keeping them in.
And what's interesting is that even the governor had compensation for eugenics victims in his budget, so the Senate's the odd man out on this.
But the Senate has the leg up in the negotiations because Berger, I don't think, is running for a Hagan's seat, and I
think he is.
You really do?
I do.
That would be too much.
Did you see the video that accompanied his tax reform proposals?
Oh, that you have to watch if you go online. There was a 7-minute video.
That was a campaign video, Gene.
Oh, of course it was. No, I think he's found.
So the Senate's passed a budget. The House is not going to concur. Is not going to agree with the budget. They're going to pass their own version. Now we get to go to conference. When is that going to take place, and how long is that going to occur before they come up with some agreements? And then finally, is there any chance whatsoever Governor McCrory is going to veto this budget?
I don't think he'll ever veto the budget, but at some point in time, Art Pope has got to go to some of these budget meetings. Has to.
I would think that the House and Senate negotiations, the governor's office will be involved in, they'll be watching, weighing in. They're going to want to agree with whatever the House and Senate produce.
Strangely enough, the governor, though, seems to want to distance himself from what seems to be some crazy budget proposals. And I think he's doing that for the express purpose of having some leverage. Now,
said he wasn't going to come up with his own tax reform.
Yeah. So I don't know what his strategy is, but right now I don't think he's looking very strong.
Yeah. Chris?
Well, I think the big question is the tax reform plan. To me, that's the missing ingredient, whether they can agree on that. I think the House will start budget hearings this coming week. I'm sure they will. The subcommittees, it may take them a couple weeks. They'll come out with a bill. So then we're into mid-June. They could conceivably get the budget itself done, but I'm not sure they can come to an agreement on the tax plan, which may be, there's still rumors out there of a special session or some other way to deal with the revenue part.
And that's what I want to talk about next. 2 weeks ago, if you remember, we talked about the Senate tax reform proposals. Now the House has put theirs on the floor. We want our panel to compare and contrast the two. Again, we want to go around the table and ask each of us to give your evaluation of the House tax reform proposals. Chris, we'll start with you.
Well, I mean, I think the House tax reform proposal is not as bad as the Senate's, but that's still faint praise, I think. I still think it is a tax shift, not really tax reform. It still expands sales taxes to services and reduces income tax levels. I think it's regressive, not as regressive as the Senate plan, but I think it's closer to where they're going to end up, given, I think, Governor McCrory's position.
I think the House budget is more responsible in that they want to go slow. You remember the Speaker had said you'd better start going a little slower than what you have been in the past. But I think it takes a slower approach to let us see what happens when all of this is implemented.
Cash?
I agree with Chris that the House plan isn't all that great. But having said that, though, I like what I believe was David Lewis when he explained it, when he said that they wanted their tax plan centers on those services associated with goods that are already being taxed. Thus, those businesses are already set up for that, as opposed to the Senate, which would extend, 180 things, right. And folks have to come up with ways of collecting sales tax. So at least in that regard, I think it's a much smarter plan.
John?
There were two issues in the Senate plan that got the most attention and criticism that the House was trying to address. That was one of them, expanding the scope so that you're essentially increasing regulation of business, which is not really associated with Republicans. The other was the regressivity issue that Chris brought up. So the House addressed that by going with larger credits and exemptions in the income tax, and therefore not shifting as much to lower income. I think that the House plan might be something closer to neutral. We haven't really seen any distribution.
It's closer to what you proposed for the Locke Foundation.
It is, but the Senate plan clearly raised taxes on some families of low to moderate incomes, particularly if they had lots of children. The House plan, actually, you're going to have a lower tax to the extent you have larger families with children.
All right, we're going to compare and contrast these two plans after we come back after this break.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
You trust your family physician to care for you and your family. We treasure that trust and are committed to providing the best care possible for all North Carolinians. It's time for Medicaid reform, but not without input from North Carolina's family physicians. Medicaid reform will impact health care for all of us. Tell state leaders you want your physician involved. We need Medicaid reform that's good for North Carolina. To sign our petition of support, visit rnchealthcare.com.
Resident lenders of North Carolina are licensed providers of safe and responsible financial services. Existing regulations limit consumer choice. It's time to modernize consumer finance laws. Learn more at responsibleloansnc.com.
Where do you go when you need to know? AENC makes it easy for you to get the information you need to make well-informed public policy decisions. Our members are industry leaders who are ready to share their industry-specific insights with you. Want to hear both sides of the story? AENC members can tell you. Just use the AENC member directory as your guide or call us directly. AENC members have the knowledge, expertise, and perspective you need to create public policies that are good for North Carolina. We are ready for your call.
We now return to NC Spin.
All right, we're continuing our discussion of the two tax reform proposals between the House and the Senate. John, you made a comment earlier that there's a vast disparity in the amount of money that is being generated from these two proposals. If you will, go through and...
Well, what I meant was a very large difference in the sales tax broadening. And we mentioned this earlier. The Senate plan significantly broadens it. We would have one of the most broad bases for a sales tax in the U.S., whereas the House plan has some fairly modest changes that mostly affect, as Cash said, companies that already collect sales tax on goods but not on the services that they sell. Another difference is the corporate tax. The House is much more aggressive, taking the corporate tax from its current 6.9 all the way down to 6. The House really just tricks it down a little bit to about 6.75.
6.5, yeah.
And I think it's not even that far. The franchise tax is another thing that lots of businesses are interested in. Both plans do the same rate, but the Senate would apply the franchise tax to a set of businesses that currently don't pay it. The House avoids that. So the House and the Senate have, while the general concept is the same, try to promote growth through low marginal income tax rates and so forth, the application was very different.
Gene, I want to drill down on that just a little bit. He talked about the corporate tax rates. My understanding is that the Senate would take the corporate tax rate from 6.9 to 6. The House would scale it back to 6.5, whatever the actual figure is. All the legislators say we need to do this in order to make North Carolina more competitive with other states as far as business attraction is concerned. Is there any evidence that that makes that much difference?
Oh, I think it does, and I think what they're trying to accomplish is to get the corporate tax below or at least equal to, at this point in time, to the states that are surrounding us.
South Carolina 6.5, if I understand.
Absolutely, and Virginia, I think, but I think that the House is more responsible in the approach that they're taking than what the Senate is. The Senate is more of a just slash and burn, here we go.
The problem with two things. The problem with the corporate income tax, very few large businesses pay anywhere near 6.9% right now. They all have loopholes. They pay, some of them pay 1.5%, 2%. So that the effective tax rate for corporations is very, very low for a lot of big companies. But the feeling is that the number itself sticks out. That's why if you're going to lower it, the way to do it, I think, is to lower a lot or close a lot of these corporate loopholes and let's have a fair tax. So the second point,
which the Senate says they're doing.
Right. Well, it does happen in both plans. There's a number of things taken out.
But a really big point here, and John referenced it earlier, is and Governor McCrory said this past week he wants a revenue-neutral tax plan. Well, the Senate plan over the 2-year biennium cut $770 million out of the budget. That's hard. That's almost we're $750 million. That's hardly revenue-neutral. And I think that's going to be one of the big points that's going to could hold it up.
The House plan also is a net tax cut of it's not as much. It's $100 million or so in the first year, and maybe a couple hundred or 300 in the second.
Cash, let's talk about the personal income tax rate. The Senate plan would cut rates from a high of 7.75% to 4.5%. The House would cut it from would have one flat tax of 5.9% with a $12,000 threshold or income tax deduction. Give us your evaluations of these two.
Well, I think the House plan, I think was, we talked off camera before, with the first one, $12,000, not being taxed and directing that toward low-income families. I think that's attractive and also more understandable for the average person. You get into 7 this and 4 that and 3 that, and folks, get lost. But when you talk about your first $12,000 of income is tax-free, people like that. They like the sound of that.
One of the things that's been a point of discussion was that the Senate plan would eliminate the sales tax exemption for nonprofits. Now, the House came in and basically capped the sales tax exemption to $5 million. Does this help ease the pain, John?
Yeah, it's a very significant difference in who's affected. When you eliminate the sales tax exemption for all nonprofits, you got lots of smaller shops, you got churches, you have small charities, and maybe their amount of money is not very much, but they're all affected. Actually, when you cap it at $5 million, there's only a few nonprofits in the state that claim that large a sales tax exemption. What you're really talking about is a few big hospitals and a few big universities.
How about the exemption on home interest, Chris? The Senate plan would just eliminate that exemption altogether. What does the House do?
Well, the House leaves it in place. It caps it. Right, caps it. So, but I think you're still going to see opposition. There's fierce opposition from the realtor side.
How about the estate tax?
The death tax is dead.
Both plans destroy that.
And last year, 23 families in North Carolina paid it. So this is going to be these are the very wealthy estates. Literally 23 families paid it. So we're not talking about a tax rate for for a lot of folks.
And Tom, by the way, per the home deduction, by the way, the Senate, you've got Reverend Barber and company marching on Mondays. You'll have homeowners marching on them on Tuesdays if they pull that off. If they try to eliminate that.
There may only be 23 families paying the death tax, but they probably all watch NC-SPIN, and we love it.
You just wanted to be politically correct.
Absolutely.
All right, Governor McCrory earlier said this week he wasn't going to come out with his own tax reform proposal. What does that say to us?
Well, I don't think he has anyone capable of writing it at this point in time. This is a brand new governor.
Art Pope could do that.
Well, Art's writing the budget. I think that he's better off politically to let the House and the Senate fight that battle out before he jumps into it to get a little more experience.
We spoke briefly about this, but who do you think, which concept do you think will more likely prevail, the House version or the Senate version?
Folks say the Senate has leverage. I think it's who the governor gets behind. And the governor, if there's one aspect of all of this the governor wants, he wants at the end of the day that North Carolina has a competitive corporate tax rate.
But he's more closely akin to the House budget, is he?
He is. I think you'll end up with something that's closer to the House than the Senate plan.
After these messages, we talk about the crossover deadline.
NC-SPIN is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
North Carolina is a great place to live, work, and raise a family, but we consistently rank in the bottom third for state health. Poor health choices and inactivity cost our state $54 billion a year, dollars that could be saved through healthier living. We can do better, North Carolina. That's why NC-SPIN is working with health and community organizations to launch a Healthier NC, an education campaign and challenge to live healthier lives. Join us at ahealthierNC.com.
As homeowners, we count on the mortgage interest and property tax deductions.
I bought a home knowing that I would save on my state taxes.
My home is not an ATM for politicians in Raleigh.
I already pay my fair share.
It's wrong for politicians in Raleigh to take more of my money for their so-called tax reform.
It will hurt our fragile economy.
It will decrease home values and cost us money.
Help save the mortgage interest and property tax deductions. Visit taxreformfacts.org.
Raffaldini Vineyards is Chianti in the Carolinas. Enjoy Italian-style wines, breathtaking views, cultural events, and much more. Visit raffaldini.com.
May 16th was the crossover deadline when any bill that didn't include taxes or fees had to pass one house or the other in order to remain alive and be considered for the rest of the session. As normally is the case, we saw a flurry of activity, some 180 bills passed by one house or the other. I want to go around the table very quickly. Tell us the one bill that surprised you passing, the one that surprised you not passing. Cash.
Sharia law and the ban on outside smoking.
Well, which one's which? I mean,
I was surprised that the Sharia law was even brought
passed?
up. Yeah, being brought up. Yeah.
All right, and which one not passing?
The local ban on outdoor smoking.
All right, Chris?
Well, he stole my Sharia law thing. I was really surprised that passed. The one I was stunned that didn't pass was the one to set up a benefit corporation or subchapter B corporation, which was introduced by Leo Daughtry, which has passed in a lot of other states, the Chamber of Commerce and other states like that. It was shot down by the Tea Party.
All right.
The one that didn't pass was zero-based budgeting, and I'm not surprised at anything they did pass.
I was pleasantly surprised they passed the toll lanes bill in the House, and I was, like Cash, I was surprised the Senate did not pass that overturning of local smoking outdoor smoking bans.
All right, well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback and read our weekly column, visit the website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And we hope you'll join us next week when we'll take on more issues of interest to the people of North Carolina. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.